I am Dwayne Brown. Tonight on KPBS Evening Edition, the development debate hits a new milestone in Carmel Valley. Also, speeding up relief in the middle of California's drought. The group raising concerns over the emergency funding bill.
And I'm Peggy Pico with why some say the City Council's plan for a permanent shelter in downtown San Diego could result in more homeless people sleeping on the streets and the alternative plan that might help. But first, the conviction of the 14-year-old teen for starting the Cocos fire isn't as unusual as you might think. Why kids start fire and how the juvenile court systems handle their cases.
And strike up the band, the city that is celebrating a stadium plan that may have the Chargers moving out of San Diego. KPBS Evening Edition starts right now. Hi, good evening. Thanks for joining us. The battle over a $750 million mixed-use development in Carmel Valley raged on today. Now, you may recall project opponents packed City Hall last month protesting the One Paseo development. Today, they turned in a petition to block the project. KPBS reporter Claire Trageser was there, and she joins us now from the newsroom. Claire, first remind us what the One Paseo project covers.
It's a 23.6-acre development that would include housing, retail, and office space. It'll have nearly 1.5 million square feet of floor space and include more than 600 housing units south of Del Mar Heights Road in Carmel Valley. The project was approved by the City Council earlier this month.
So opponents of the project organized a referendum against it, right?
Yes, they had 1 month to collect 33,000 signatures, which would force the City Council either to overturn their decision or put the issue to voters in June 2016. Today, project opponents turned in 60,000 signatures. City Council President Sherry Leitner was there and said people from across the city signed the petition.
Once San Diegans learned that the approval of One Paseo was about more than Carmel Valley, that it might set a dangerous precedent for developers to bring massive new projects to their own communities, they acted quickly to add their names to the cause.
Now, Claire, it sounds like they have enough signatures to force a public vote.
You would think so, but a spokeswoman for the project's developer says not so fast. She says they've gone out and collected 27,500 requests from people to take back their signatures. If all of those requests are valid, then there won't be enough signatures to force a referendum.
And when will we find out the results?
All of the signatures have to be counted in 30 days.
KPBS reporter Claire Trageser. A new Chargers and Raiders stadium may be on the fast track in the city of Carson up north today. Stadium supporters marched into City Hall. They say they collected more than 15,000 signatures for the project. Isn't she cute? It may be enough for the development to avoid lengthy environmental reviews. Now, last month, San Diego Chargers and the Oakland Raiders announced a plan to build a 72,000-seat stadium if they could not strike deals for new venues in their home cities. Californians would get more time off work and more pay while on family leave under a new measure in the state assembly. KPBS health reporter Kenny Goldberg has more on this proposal from our North County Bureau. Kenny, why do supporters say the family leave program needs to be expanded?
Well, Dwayne, California became the first state in the country to offer paid family leave back in 2002. And since then, more than 1.5 million Californians have taken advantage of it. However, a recent report from the State Office of Research says a decreasing number of low-income people have been taking advantage of family leave the last few years, and that's because the program only pays 55% of their wages while they're on leave. So you can imagine someone who makes less than $20,000 a year who lives paycheck to paycheck, 55% of their wages just doesn't cut it.
So in what ways would the Assembly bill actually expand the program, Kenny?
Well, the program under the bill would expand from 6 weeks to 10 weeks. And it would also increase the percentage that people would get paid of their salaries while they're on leave. So for people who make under $20,000 a year, they would be bumped up to 80% of their wages. People who make from $20,000 to $60,000 would get 75% of their wages. And for people who make more than $60,000, they'd get 65% of their income. So that's a pretty substantial increase.
And what kind of opposition is there to this idea of expanding family leave?
The author of the bill tells me he hasn't seen any opposition yet, although it's still very early in the process. But part of the opposition might be muted by the fact that paid family leave is totally paid for in California through employee payroll contributions, so employers don't have to pay a cent for it. And I would add that California is one of only 3 states, other than New Jersey and Rhode Island, that offer paid family leave.
KPBS health reporter Kenny Goldberg. Powerful testimony from the woman who has become the new face of a campaign calling for the legalization of assisted suicide. State senators are considering a measure that would make it legal for terminally ill patients in California to kill themselves with life-ending drugs. Brittany Maynard's family released a new video of her testimony. It was shot 19 days before her assisted suicide death in Oregon. It's one of 5 states where the practice is legal. In the video, Maynard tells lawmakers no one should have to leave home to legally kill themselves under a doctor's care.
The decision about how I end my dying process should be up to me and my family under a doctor's care. How dare the government make decisions or limit options for terminally ill people like me? Unfortunately, California law prevented me from getting the end-of-life option I deserved.
Some medical groups say prescribing life-ending medication violates a doctor's oath to do no harm. Advocates say they would consider taking the issue to voters if it fails in Sacramento. We may be one step closer to immediate drought relief here in the state. Senators approved an emergency plan today to speed up $1 billion in funding for water projects and infrastructure. Now, experts with the State Legislative Analyst's Office criticized the bill. They say it lacks details on how funds will be spent. The Assembly takes up the bill tomorrow. For the second time in 2 weeks, an unusual heat wave is building over San Diego County. KPBS reporter Susan Murphy tells us our warm weather has arrived about 2 months early.
Temperatures across the county could reach 20 degrees above average on Thursday and Friday, from the inland valleys all the way to the coast. That's because mild Santa Ana winds combined with a high pressure system are once again pushing the cool marine layer out to sea and allowing the atmosphere to heat up. Meteorologist Alex Tardy with the National Weather Service says temperatures at the beach on Thursday and Friday could hit the upper 80s.
With the dry air, or the warm air, and the warm sea surface temperatures, it has an impact on the marine layer, making it less effective. It makes it smaller, not as deep. It burns off quicker.
Inland Valley temperatures will hover near 90. The heat wave is expected to break down starting Saturday, but overall, the persistent hot and dry pattern is predicted to continue through spring. Susan Murphy, KPBS News.
And we are already starting to feel the warm up today. At the beaches, we're looking at temperatures in the upper 80s. And 80s in the inland valleys as well. Some relief from the heat in the mountains with temperatures expected in the 70s over the next few days. 90s, toasty in the desert. Distracted driving is still the leading cause of death among teenagers in California now. A new report from AAA shows nearly 1,700 videos that capture the actions of teen drivers just seconds before a crash. And as you'll see, cell phones aren't the only distractions. It's a sunny day and the lighting in this car is perfect, so why not put on some lipstick while you're driving? Researchers rarely have access to video like this, clearly showing what teenage drivers were doing just seconds before running off the road. California Highway Patrol says it's a growing problem in San Diego County and the state.
Technology's only getting more advanced, and what we're finding is it's only going to get worse.
Highway Patrol Officer Kevin Pearlstein says they're promoting a simple solution to the problem.
Turn your phone off. That's what we're promoting. It should be automatic. Get in, seatbelt on, power the phone down. Wherever you're going, you're not going to, in that 10-15 minute drive, you're not going to miss anything.
AAA says distraction was a factor in 6 out of 10 moderate to severe crashes involving teens. 4 times as many as official estimates based on police reports. Cell phone use is cited for 12% of those crashes.
Then I needed to get my phone.
But the most common distraction for teens was talking to passengers and using a cell phone.
That was my phone.
California already restricts teenagers from talking or texting while driving. They must also be accompanied by an adult when transporting other teenagers or when driving between 11 p.m. and 5 in the morning.
And we equate that to the driver's license restrictions. The teens have to be by themselves for that first year. The teen driver is going to be a safer driver because there aren't distractions in the car.
San Diego City Council took up the issue of finding a permanent shelter for homeless people downtown. It would replace the city's 2 emergency winter tents. Peggy Pico finds out why some say the plan could make matters worse.
There were more than 650 unsheltered homeless people living in downtown San Diego in 2014, and that's according to the Regional Task Force on the Homeless. Now the city says it'll fund a 350-bed permanent shelter run by St. Vincent de Paul's Village. But could a permanent facility result in more people living on the street? Joining me with the details are my guest, Rick Gentry, President and CEO of the San Diego Housing Commission, and Marcos Aguilera, Chairman of the Barrio Logan Association. And Rick, the decision of the City Council to do this permanent shelter is part of a comprehensive plan to deal with homelessness in San Diego. How is the permanent facility, how does it factor into this change of plans?
The permanent facility factors into the change of plans in 2 ways. Number one was a decision made by the City Council last October to get people out of tents. These are sprung structures that were never designed for human habitation. They've been in place off and on for 29 years. So the council asked the Housing Commission to look for a permanent structure, number one, because people shouldn't be living in tents. They should be living in permanent structures. And secondarily, what we looked for was a 12-month facility rather than just a seasonal facility for San Diego's winter. And what we wind up with is a permanent facility that will house 350 people 12 months out of the year with services rather than a sprung structure, tents, that will house people for 4 months.
Let's talk about the beds. So my understanding is that the 350 beds in the winter shelters will be going away essentially, and the beds at St. Vincent, they're not actually additional beds because they're already in existence. So how is the new plan going to result in more people being having facilities and not being on the street?
Well, there's not a reduction in resources here at all. In fact, it's an expansion. It's a matter of perspective. St. Vincent de Paul's has shifted resources from their transitional facility, the Paul Mirabile Center, to something called rapid rehousing, which is part of a housing first approach, permanent supportive housing. So the money being used for these 350 beds will be used to put people in a more permanent structure, a house, or home, if you will, somewhere through in San Diego. That frees up these 350 beds to be a replacement for the 350 beds that are in the 2 tents right now.
That are temporary, not year-round. Marcus, what are your concerns about this new plan for a permanent housing facility?
I'd first like to emphasize that I believe that your 650 in downtown figure is probably low. A lot of the statistics for that don't actually extend to Barrio Logan and exterior areas. The biggest concern is that the numbers for us don't add up. And we don't believe that the city should be getting away from lowering the number of overall beds. I definitely want to get behind the Housing Commission and the Housing First model, how they're approaching this. I applaud them in that effort. However, we do not believe that the numbers, the inventory for permanent supportive housing currently exist to base this theoretical view.
And we'll get back to that in a second, Rick, but I do want to ask you, Marcos, that you're involved with a group of neighborhood councils that have secured a facility in north of downtown, I understand, or you're looking at one there that would house up to 900 homeless people. How would that be financed, and what would you need to do with the city to get that approved?
Well, yesterday before the council meeting, we did meet with the mayor's office, and we started to broach that conversation. As I've told Rick offline, and actually spoke to Deacon Vargas, president of Father Joe's, hey, let's all sit and talk about this, because this is a possible proposal, but it has to be with private monies and public money. So the political will needs to be there.
And Rick, what do you think? Do you think the council should consider an alternative and/or another permanent facility for people who are homeless?
There is a need for more resources for homeless services in San Diego, and the Housing Commission would be willing to speak with virtually anybody on any responsible proposal. I'll point out that any proposal that comes along would have to be provide the proper services and also be financially sustainable over the long term.
And what is your response to Marco's concern that this isn't going to be enough beds? There won't be enough inventory in San Diego with this new permanent facility.
It is not a reduction in resources. It is a redeployment of resources to a more permanent use. So it's not a reduction. It may be a reduction in East Village, but a lot of the East Village leadership has asked for a reduction in that particular part of town. So we're redeploying toward a housing first model, which hopefully will get people off the streets for more than just a temporary time period.
And very briefly, we need to end on this. When would we know if a new permanent facility would be filling the gap for these homeless people? When would we know that?
Well, I don't have a good answer for that. It would depend on the proposal and the availability of resources. So it would take a little time to evaluate, and then the resources would need to be there. Right now we're using the resources we have in what we think is the best possible way.
So if the permanent shelter gets built, then what I mean is that is there a monitoring way to see how it's doing, and how soon could we tell?
Yes. We'll know right away. There's a permanent intake and evaluation process now. People coming in will be a permanent deployment of what their needs are. So we'll be working on that right away.
All right, Rick Gentry and Marcos Aguilera, thank you. There's a lot more on our website, kpbs.org. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
The 14-year-old girl convicted of multiple arson charges, including starting last year's Cocos fire in the North County, said she intentionally set the fire, even though she knew it was wrong. In yesterday's ruling, the judge said, quote, "There are no winners in this case." One homeowner whose house was destroyed by the Cocos fire put it this way.
Today, the emotion I feel right now is just sadness. It's just sad to me. And I'm not a person that's vindictive. I'm a person that wishes harm for this girl for the rest of her life. This is going to follow her for the rest of her life. And to me, that's sad.
Peggy Pico explains why child arson isn't that unusual and what's being done to change it.
Children are responsible for nearly half of all the fires that are deliberately set in the U.S. That's according to San Diego's Burn Institute. Joining me with how the courts deal with juveniles accused of serious crimes is my guest, Deputy District Attorney Michelle Lindley, Chief of the county's Juvenile Division. And Michelle, does the DA's office see very many cases that involve juvenile arson suspects?
We see as many cases in juvenile as we do in adult, all different kinds of crimes. So yes, we see anywhere over the last 5 years between 18 in a year to 40 in a year.
That might surprise some people, but I understand that juvenile arson is actually something that happens across the country.
It does, and lots of times it's not arson like people would think of with a pyromaniac. It's more of fire setting. So there are things that are going on in that minor's life, whether it be mental health issues or family issues, and how they act out and how they release that pressure is through fire setting.
The 14-year-old girl at the center of the Cocos arson case was tried as a juvenile. How does the DA's office determine if they'll try a suspect as a juvenile or an adult?
Well, first of all, under the law, we can't try anyone that's under the age of 14 at the time the crime occurred as an adult. That's the law. But then there are two different ways that it can be done. It can be done by asking a judge, do you think this person should be in adult court? Or the DA can make the decision herself. And so you look at things like how old they are, how sophisticated they were, what type of crime, what their prior history was. All those things are looked at, and then when we're talking about a direct file, the DA makes the decision herself.
And in this case, the Cocos fire case, the girl was 13 at the time that the fires were set.
Correct.
I see. How are juveniles generally sentenced within the juvenile court system?
In the juvenile court system, system, the goal is rehabilitation, so it's very different than the adult court. So there's no standard sentence. Whereas you could say someone has a driving under the influence in adult, certain things are going to happen. In juvenile, they look at each minor, what their prior record is, what their family is like, what their school is like, and then they tailor something directly for that minor, so you can't ever say exactly what someone would get for a crime that's committed.
Does it go on their criminal record if it's a serious crime?
It can. So certain crimes are what they call 707B offenses. That's a Welfare and Institutions Code charge, and those cannot be sealed. Normally, a case would be, everything would be confidential and that record would be sealed, but these types of charges, the 707B, very serious charges, are not sealed and they are open.
When it comes to a juvenile correction facility, we have them here in San Diego, how is it different from like the adult correction facilities?
It's all based, once again, on rehabilitation. So they're going to school even though they're in custody. They have mental health services available. They have a lot of services right there in the facility. It's not just sitting there downtime. It's working with them to make sure that they're going to be able to do better when they come out.
When it comes to juvenile arson cases, first, we'll start with that. Do parents face any consequences if it's determined that these teens, let's say, or 18 has started a fire?
They can. If there's restitution ordered in a case, then they would be also liable for a certain percentage of the restitution. If the minor is in a facility, a detention facility, they actually pay for the daily cost of that facility. If they go to a mental health facility, they can pay for that. They also lose a little bit of control in that if they want their child to stay out till 9, but the court has said that child's curfew is 6, that's the way it is. Or if they can't have a cell phone, those types of things.
And the court sort of determines that that aspect of it.
Yes.
When it comes to programs, let's say a juvenile is sentenced to some sort of rehabilitation or probation to try to help them, what sort of programs are out there, or who determines where they go and what they do?
The probation department does a social study, which is like a sentencing report, and they make recommendations to the judge about what should happen, whether they should have mental health services, whether they should go to treatment as far as drug treatment, whether they should be in a certain school. There's a lot of different services. They have what they call wraparound, where they bring people into the family to help them learn how to work together as a family and respect each other.
What do you think the community can take away from this Coco's case fire?
I just think that you always have to, kids are kids, and you always have to be there for them. You have to listen to them, and that's our responsibility as a parent, not to always be a friend. Sometimes we have to be the bad guy. Sometimes we have to look at things they don't want us to look at, but that's how you keep them out of the juvenile justice system.
Michelle Lindley, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
I'm Judy Woodruff on the next News Hour, using robots to help battle Ebola a year after the deadly outbreak began. That's Wednesday on the PBS News Hour.
Thousands of people marched to the Alabama Capitol today. They are retracing the steps of the final leg of the 1965 Selma to Montgomery Voting Rights March. Now, some see playwriting as an opportunity for activism. This is true for the playwright behind Selma 65, the one-woman show being performed tonight in San Diego. KPBS arts reporter Beth Accomando has more.
The story of civil rights activist Viola Liuzzo is not widely known. It was the subject of the documentary Home of the Brave, and now it fuels a one-woman show called Selma 65. Actress Marietta Hedges was moved by the story of this young woman who partook in the Selma to Montgomery March in 1965.
It's an amazing story. This Viola Liuzzo decides to go to the Selma voting march and is gunned down by the Ku Klux Klan, and in the car is an informant, an FBI informant.
Playwright Katrine Fayou didn't know how to tell the story until she hit on the idea of having Hedges play both Viola Liuzzo and FBI informant Tommy Rowe. The play is about the Voting Rights Act, as well as a reaction to the 2013 Supreme Court revision.
The Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act. I don't think people understand the extremely bloody struggle that occurred for the Voting Rights Act to pass, and the extreme power that voting has, and which is clear in the way that it's been gutted, and that people have actually been trying to destroy the ability for minorities to vote and for older people to vote. That is just heartbreaking to me. I don't understand how that happened.
Fiyu has written plays about human rights issues in Bosnia, Cambodia, and Iran, and says it's an effective medium for starting a discussion.
The people that I work with in human rights that are outside of theater, they are always telling me this is the way, because textbooks and memos, it doesn't work as well as something that an audience can come into and experience.
Beth Accomando, KPBS News.
Tickets are sold out for tonight's performance at the Joan Kroc Institute for Peace and Justice, but you can still see Bruce Davidson's photographic series about Selma and Montgomery in 1965 at the USD campus. Here's a look at what we're working on for tomorrow in the KPBS newsroom. Imagine sipping cocktails, tweeting during a live symphony performance. Coming up on Morning Edition, the other ways some orchestras are trying to reinvent themselves. Of course, you can find tonight's stories on our website, kpbs.org/evening edition. Thanks for joining us. Have a great night.